Raymond Okafor was not the kind of man who panicked. At 42, he had built a life brick by brick. A modest but comfortable home in a quiet suburb of Lagos, a growing logistics business he had spent 15 years nurturing, and a marriage that, at least on the surface, appeared solid. He was methodical, patient, the kind of man who read the contract before he signed it and measured twice before he cut. So when the first signs appeared, he did not explode. He observed. It began the way these things often do, not with a single dramatic moment, but with a slow accumulation of small, strange details. His wife, Adeyes, had always been a warm and open woman. In 12 years of marriage, Raymond had known her to be consistent. She woke early, made coffee, kissed him on the cheek before heading to her job as a secondary school vice principal, and came home by 6. She talked about her students with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved her work. She laughed easily. She was present. Then, sometime in the early months of that year, something shifted. Raymond couldn't pinpoint the exact day. It crept in the way fog does, without announcement. Adeyes started staying later at school. There were phone calls she took in the bathroom, the door locked, the water running. There were text message notifications that made her jump slightly, reach for the phone with a quickness that was too deliberate, too careful. She started wearing perfume on ordinary weekdays. She lost weight, not dramatically, but noticeably, and started buying new clothes. Not teacher's clothes, different clothes. Raymond noticed all of this. He said nothing. He was not in denial. He simply understood that confronting a person too early, without evidence, without certainty, rarely produced the truth. It produced defensiveness, denial, and, if he was wrong, a wound in the marriage that might never fully heal. He had seen friends destroy their marriages over misread signals. He would not make the same mistake. Instead, he became a quiet detective in his own home. He started paying attention to patterns. Adeyes claimed she was attending school board meetings on Tuesday evenings. He called the school administrator, a woman named Mrs. Folake Bellow, under the guise of discussing a school sponsorship from his business. Mrs. Bellow mentioned in passing that the board had not met on any recent Tuesday. He noted the date of Adeyes' claim. He noted the discrepancy. He said nothing. He noticed that she had set up a second WhatsApp account on her phone. He saw the notification briefly before she cleared the screen. He noted it. He said nothing. He checked their shared bank account. There were withdrawals, cash, in amounts that were not enormous, but were consistent. 2,000 here, 3,000 there. Money that Adeyes, who managed her own savings carefully, would have had no reason to withdraw for household needs. For 3 weeks, Raymond compiled these quiet observations. He was not angry yet. He was thorough. And then one evening, while Adeyes was in the bathroom, her personal phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Raymond glanced at it without meaning to. The screen lit up, and the message preview was clear enough. "I miss you already. Tonight was perfect. Femi." Raymond set the phone face down, exactly as he had found it. He walked to the living room. He sat down. He breathed. And then he began planning. The name Femi was a starting point. Raymond knew enough about his wife's social circle to know that this was not a name attached to any colleague or family friend he had met. He began a quiet investigation, not born of rage, but of the same methodical precision he applied to his business. He needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with before he made a single move. Through a mutual contact in Adeyes' network, a cousin she had introduced him to at a family gathering years ago, Raymond learned that his wife had recently been seen with a man at a restaurant in Victoria Island. The cousin, not knowing what she was revealing, mentioned him casually. "That friend of hers, the property developer fellow, very flashy, Femi Adeyinka. You know him?" Raymond did not know him, but he was about to. Femi Adeyinka, as Raymond discovered over the following days, was a 45-year-old man who presented himself as a successful real estate developer. He had an Instagram page with photographs of luxury apartments, foreign trips, and the kind of curated lifestyle that suggested wealth and freedom. He had over 18,000 followers. His profile said he was based in Lagos, single, and building an empire. Raymond hired a private investigator, a quiet, serious man named Chidi, who came recommended by a lawyer friend. He gave Chidi the name, the Instagram handle, and what little else he knew. "Take a week," he told him. "I want to know who this man really is." What Chidi brought back 1 week later made Raymond sit in his car for 20 minutes before he could walk back into his office. Femi Adeyinka was not single. Femi Adeyinka was, in fact, married, 3 times over, to 3 different women, in 3 different cities. His legal wife, a woman named Blessing, lived in Abuja and had been married to Femi for 9 years. They had 2 children together. She believed her husband traveled frequently for business. In Port Harcourt, a woman named Gozi believed she was Femi's wife for 4 years. They had a church wedding, photographs, a shared apartment. In Ibadan, a woman named Comfort had been with Femi for 3 years, also under the belief that she was his partner, his woman, his future. And now there was Adais, Raymond's wife, who believed she had found something rare and real with a man who was, in truth, running an elaborate network of deceptions across an entire country. Chidi laid out the documentation on Raymond's desk: photographs, records, a copy of Femi's marriage certificate to Blessing, witness accounts, even a photograph of Femi at Ngozi's family event in Port Harcourt. The evidence was substantial. It was irrefutable. Raymond looked at it all for a long time. He thought about Adais, the woman he had loved, the woman who had stood beside him at their own altar, the woman who had once cried at their daughter's school play because she was so proud. He thought about their 15-year-old daughter, Chisom, who was upstairs right now in their home, doing her homework, unaware that her family was a few days from fracturing. He thought about Blessing in Abuja, and Ngozi in Port Harcourt, and Comfort in Ibadan. Women who had no idea they were being deceived, not just by the same man, but simultaneously. Women who were waking up each morning, making plans, building what they believed were real lives with a man who collected them like possessions. Raymond made a decision. He would not simply confront ADAs in the privacy of their home and allow Femi Adeyinka to continue his predatory operation unchallenged. He would ensure that the truth came out completely, and he would do it in a way that left no room for manipulation or escape. He called Chidi back. He asked him to locate contact information for Blessing, Ngozi, and Comfort. Raymond's plan was precise. He would not shout. He would not beg. He would not break furniture or send threatening messages. He had watched enough chaos in other people's crises to know that emotion, unchecked, gave liars room to maneuver. Instead, he would construct something Femi Adeyinka would not see coming, a room full of truth with no exits. He reached out to Blessing in Abuja first, through a carefully worded message that said only, "I have information about your husband, Femi Adeyinka, that you urgently need to know. I am not your enemy. I am a husband in a similar situation. Please call me." He included his name and number. Blessing called within the hour. She was cautious, initially hostile. She had received messages like this before, she said, from troublemakers trying to destabilize her marriage. But as Raymond laid out what he knew, calmly and without embellishment, her voice changed. He heard something in her that he recognized, the sound of a person whose half-formed suspicions are suddenly handed their confirmation. She had wondered. She had doubted herself. Now she knew. Ngozi from Port Harcourt was harder to reach. She did not respond to the first message. Raymond sent a second, attaching one of Chidi's photographs. She responded within minutes, her message brief. When and where? Comfort in Ibadan wept during their phone call. She had only recently discovered she was pregnant. Raymond listened to her cry, and he felt the particular weight of what Femi Adeyinka had done, not as an abstraction, but as a cascade of real damage rippling through real lives. He steadied his voice and told her, "Come, be present. You deserve to see this." The arrangement was this. Raymond would tell Adais that he wanted them to have a calm, mature conversation about some concerns he had, and that he had invited a neutral mediator, a pastor he knew, to be present. He knew Adaze would immediately warn Femi, and he knew that a man like Femi would not be able to resist showing up. Men who sustained elaborate deceptions were, by nature, overconfident. Femi would assume Raymond was weak, cuckolded, desperate to save his marriage. He would come to the meeting expecting to walk out victorious. Raymond booked a private room at a hotel he knew well. Neutral ground, professional, with enough space for everyone. He arranged chairs deliberately. One chair isolated at the far end of the table. That would be Femi's chair. He printed the documents Chidi had compiled. He prepared a folder for each woman. He rehearsed nothing. He didn't need to. The truth required no rehearsal. On the morning of the meeting, Raymond woke early, made coffee, and sat in the quiet kitchen of the home he had built. He looked around at the walls, the photographs, the accumulated textures of a life shared. He did not feel hatred. He felt strangely, a kind of enormous calm. The calm of a man who has decided that he is owed, at minimum, the dignity of honesty. Adaze dressed carefully that afternoon. Raymond noticed. She wore a blazer she rarely brought out, something presentable and composed. She had told him the night before that she appreciated him wanting to talk things through, rather than making assumptions. The phrase landed with the particular sting of someone who believed they were managing a narrative they thought they controlled. Raymond said nothing. He nodded. He drove. They arrived at the hotel at 3 o'clock. The private room was ready. Two of Raymond's closest friends, men who knew the full story and had agreed to be present as witnesses, were already seated quietly near the door. Adaze looked at them and frowned slightly, but Raymond guided her gently to a chair and said, "We're waiting for a few more people." "What few more people?" Adaze asked. Her voice had a careful edge to it. "People who are relevant to this conversation," Raymond said. He poured her a glass of water. He sat across from her. Femi arrived at 10 minutes past 3. He walked into the room with the studied ease of a man who believes he is the most important person in any space he enters. A tailored shirt, expensive shoes, a smile that was warm and slightly condescending at once. He looked at Raymond with the barely concealed pity of a man who assumes he has already won. He pulled out the isolated chair at the far end of the table and sat down with the air of someone settling in for a brief and manageable inconvenience. He had not noticed the door open again behind him. Blessing walked in first. She was tall and composed, dressed in the muted colors of a woman who had decided she was done with pretending. Behind her came Gozi, small and quiet, her eyes moving immediately to Femi with an expression that was equal parts grief and fury. And behind Gozi came Comfort, visibly shaken, pressing her hands together as if in prayer. The room changed. The air itself seemed to rearrange. Femi turned. He saw Blessing first. The smile on his face did not disappear immediately. It took a moment, like a light that flickers before it goes out. Then he saw Ngozi. Then Comfort. His body went very still, in the way that bodies do when the mind is processing something it cannot immediately integrate. Adaze looked at the three women. She looked at Raymond. She looked at Femi. She said nothing. Raymond placed the folders on the table, one in front of each woman, and one in the center for Adaze. He spoke calmly. "My name is Raymond Okafor. I am the husband of this woman, Adaze, who has been in a relationship with this man for the past several months. I want everyone in this room to understand who this man actually is, because I believe each of you deserves that information." He opened the folder. He laid out the marriage certificate between Femi and Blessing, dated 9 years ago, stamped and witnessed. He placed beside it photographs of Femi at Ngozi's family events in Port Harcourt. He laid out a certified document from Ibadan, along with photographs of Femi and Comfort at what appeared to be a traditional introduction ceremony. "This man," Raymond said, "is legally married to the woman on his right. He has maintained a domestic partnership with the woman on his left for 4 years. He has done the same with the woman beside her for 3 years, and for the past several months, he has been in a relationship with my wife, presenting himself as a single, available man." Femi found his voice. "This is fabricated. This man is threatened. He's trying to—" Femi. It was Blessing who said it. Just his name. The single syllable landed in the room like something heavy dropped from a height. Femi stopped speaking. I have the marriage certificate in my hands, Blessing continued, her voice steady, almost eerily so. I have 9 years of my life in my hands. Don't. She opened her folder. She looked at the photographs. She looked at them for a long moment. She closed the folder. Ngozi was crying silently, pressing a folded tissue to her mouth, shaking her head slowly, as though trying to dislodge something. Comfort sat very still. She had not opened her folder. She did not need to. She had known, somewhere deep, she had always known, and the confirmation required no further documentation. Adies had not moved. She sat in her chair with her water glass untouched in front of her, staring at Femi with an expression Raymond had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not shame, but something rawer than both. She was looking at Femi the way a person looks at a building they have just watched collapse, with the particular horror of someone who had been inside it only moments before. Adies, Raymond said quietly. The man you told me was successful and honest and different from other men. I need you to understand what you were actually part of. Femi tried once more. He stood up. He was a large man, and he used his size now, filling the room with a performance of indignation. This is slander. I don't know these women. I don't know what. You have a scar, Ngozi said, her voice surprisingly clear through her tears. On the inside of your left wrist. You told me you got it as a child, from falling off a bicycle in Ijibu Road. She paused. Only someone who has been close to you would know that. The silence that followed was total. Femi sat down. What happened next came without warning. Adies had been sitting very still for several minutes. Her breathing, which Raymond had been watching from across the table, had grown shallower. She had aged somehow in the space of an hour. Something in the set of her face had changed, gone inward. She was a woman watching the story she had told herself dissolve in real time, and there was no revised version available to replace it. The man she had risked everything for, her marriage, her family, her daughter's stability, her own reputation, was not who she had imagined him to be. He was a construction, a fiction maintained across multiple cities, sustained by the same practiced warmth he had turned on each of them in turn. In turn. She had not just been deceived. She had been one of many. There was no special story. There was no singular connection. She had been a stop on a well-traveled route. Raymond saw it before it happened, a sudden draining of color from her face, a slight swaying. He was half out of his chair when Adies's head dropped forward and she slid sideways, her glass of water tipping and spilling as she collapsed against the side of her chair and slumped toward the floor. Raymond reached her in 2 steps. One of his friends was already calling for help. The hotel manager appeared in the doorway within seconds, and within minutes a medical team was in the room. Adies had not lost consciousness fully. She was in a kind of shock, trembling, unresponsive to her name for several long seconds before her eyes refocused, and she looked up at Raymond, who was kneeling beside her. He was holding her hand. Later, he would not be entirely sure why. He would think about it for months afterward. Perhaps because whatever she had done, she was still the mother of his child. Perhaps because whatever he felt, the betrayal, the quiet months of methodical grief, he was not made of the kind of material that allows a person to watch another person suffer and do nothing. The paramedics determined she had experienced a vasovagal response, her body's reaction to extreme emotional shock. It was not a heart attack. She would be physically all right. They helped her to a couch along the wall and gave her water while her breathing steadied. Femi had not moved to help her. He had remained in his chair with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the table. It was Blessing who finally spoke into the quiet. She addressed no one in particular. He told me last month that he was going to Abuja for a client meeting, she said, her voice almost conversational. I packed his bag. I ironed his shirts. She stopped. She folded her hands. She said nothing else. One by one, the women gathered themselves. Ngozi left first, supported by a friend she had kept waiting in the lobby. Comfort left without looking at anyone. Blessing paused at the door and turned to Raymond. "Thank you," she said. It was a strange thing to say to a man whose marriage was also ending, and both of them understood the inadequacy of it. But she meant it, and he knew she did. When the room had cleared, when Femi had been quietly and firmly escorted out by Raymond's two friends and told, in plain terms, that the documentation compiled by the private investigator would be made available to relevant parties, should he ever contact any of these women again, Raymond returned to where Ada sat on the couch. She looked at him. Her eyes were red. She opened her mouth and closed it again. He found in that moment that he did not want an explanation from her. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, in the way she might intend one. "Chisholm is at her grandmother's tonight," he said. "She doesn't know anything. I made sure of that." He paused. "I think we should both go home separately and sleep, and in the morning we can talk about what comes next. Not tonight." Adaze nodded. It was a small, broken movement. Raymond stood, gathered his folders, and walked out of the hotel room. Epilogue. What comes after? Raymond and Adaze did not reconcile. In the months that followed, they separated quietly and eventually filed for divorce, with the mutual, exhausted agreement of two people who understood that what had broken could not be reconstructed into its original shape. Their daughter Chisholm was told with gentleness and care. She was hurt. She is still, in some ways, working through it. But she is surrounded by people who love her, and she's going to be all right. Blessing filed for divorce from Femi Adeyinka. The proceedings were lengthy and difficult. Femi initially fought them, but Blessing had documentation, and she had the quiet solidarity of two other women willing to provide testimony. The divorce was finalized. Ngozi, who had not been legally married to Femi, had no divorce to file. But she had her own recovery to manage. The grief of 4 years. The rebuilding of a self-image that had been quietly eroded by a man who made her feel chosen while choosing everyone. She sought counseling. She is still in it. Comfort, after much deliberation, made the decision that was right for her circumstances. She does not speak publicly about what happened. She has, by all accounts, moved forward. Femi Adeyinka, confronted with mounting legal and social consequences, eventually relocated. He is not the subject of this story's resolution. He is its cautionary presence, the evidence that some people move through the world treating other people's lives as raw material for their own comfort. Such people exist. They are skilled at appearing otherwise. The lesson, if there is one, is not that love is dangerous or that trust is foolish, but that character over time always leaves a trail. Patterns emerge, evidence accumulates, and the people willing to look, to observe without flinching, will eventually see what is there. Raymond went back to his business. He went back to measuring twice before cutting. He went back to the patient, methodical life that had always suited him, except now it was his alone, reshaped around a different kind of quiet. Some evenings he sits with Chisholm, and they watch football and argue about teams. And in those hours, the weight of what happened lifts slightly, not all the way, but enough. He does not hate Adaze. He's not sure he's capable of that, regardless of how much might have justified it. What he feels for her now is something more muted and more honest. The complicated regard of a person who shared half his adult life with another, and emerged from that sharing, changed, bruised, and perhaps unexpectedly, still standing. The house was sold. The proceeds were divided. Raymond moved into an apartment he chose carefully, furnished slowly, and made his own. On the wall of the living room, he hung a single framed print with a quotation that had found him in the months after everything happened. The truth does not require your permission to exist. It only requires someone willing to look. He has never found out who said it first. He supposes it doesn't matter.